Hey y'all, welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast about all geeky aspects of software delivery, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Villela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today, I have Helen Shen. Welcome, Helen.
Hi everyone. Hi
So nice to
Adriana.
have you. Hey. It's so nice to have you on the show. Now, first things first, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from a small town outside of Ottawa. It's called Carleton Place. It's a
Awesome. Yay, another Canadian. Always exciting. Cool. Well, we're going to get started with some lightning round questions before we get into the meaty bits. So, are you ready?
yes,
All right, let's do this. Okay, first question. Are you left handed or right handed?
right-handed.
All right, iPhone or Android?
iPhone,
Mac, Linux, or Windows?
Mac, Linux, and Windows.
Ooh, all of them. Awesome. I love it. What's your favorite programming language?
Java,
Awesome. Dev or ops?
DevOps.
Awesome. I've had a few people who have answered DevOps as well, so I love it. I love it. No wrong answers either way. Okay. JSON or YAML?
JSON.
Ooh, I think you might be one of the few on Camp JSON so far. I need to do a poll at some point.
I started embracing YAML a while back, but that space got me.
Oh, yeah. I know. I've definitely gotten burned too many times by the indentation on YAML. I
At the
definitely feel your
beginning
pain.
stage, the learning of troubleshooting whole night with my espresso and then figure out it's a space.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. And it's like, why do you hate me so much? Yeah, I feel ya. Okay, two more questions left. Do you prefer to consume content through video or text?
Text.
All right. And finally, what is your superpower?
My superpower is make everyone else to have superpower.
Ooh, I like that. That's very meta. Amazing, amazing. Well, thanks so much for doing the lightning round questions. Now it's time to get into the meaty bits.
Let's do it.
I'm very excited for this conversation because we had our pre-chat a couple weeks ago, and I feel like the ideas just started flowing on this, and so I'm very stoked for our topic of discussion. So I think when we were chatting initially. One of the things that you brought up was the importance of asking why. So, can you
Mhm.
elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, yes. So I have been through career in different organizations doing different type of technology, different tech stacks, different solutions. And one thing I found that make me going through um, the success of the projects, the deliverables, the customer satisfaction, everything is because of that question. Why? Why are we doing this? Um, because using DevOps as an example, why are we doing this? Not only because it's cool, even though it is cool,
Totally.
um, and not every organization may be ready for DevOps. But why? I remember at my junior stage that I took automation for granted. And when I got into projects that embrace agility and automation, I was pumped, I was motivated, I was ready to go. And I didn't understand at that time the word fit for purpose.
Hmm.
I didn't quite get it. I heard it, I acknowledged it, but I didn't. I can't say that I fully understood the context of it. Then, through different experiences, different projects, and also different growth in myself, then I started to use that word. And I can see the same reaction from my team members or more junior um, team members. Then I start to realize, okay, I they have been through what I've been through and what I can offer, is that sharing that why. Why do we need fit for purpose? And why is there need for such process? Why is it so difficult? There is a reason why it's so difficult. And is there a reason that it had to be like this? Or there is a chance for improvement. So even though we're talking about ways to enhance experience, customer experience, user experience, developer experience, we really truly have to understand why. What's our problem definition? What are we trying to solve? Then the journey will become much easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, for our audience, can you define what you mean by fit for purpose?
Yes. So, using a technology project as an example, um, I don't know if some of you might experience that you're participating in multiple projects. And one project is embracing agile, one project is embracing waterfall. And even though by the book in agile, you should be a consistent part 100%, you might not get into that. You might have to participate in multiple projects in different ways. Some are all manual, some are half automated, some are fully automated. And while you are, especially for a single contributor in the project, sometimes it's very hard to switch that context. And fit for
Totally.
purpose, yeah. And what I mean by fit for purpose is to actually understand from the customer perspective, management perspective of what is your goal trying to solve and why it has to be this way. And sometimes the answer could be that this because the architecture, because the environment, the organization is very big and complex, and to ensure the quality and audit requirement is the best for waterfall approach maybe. On the other hand, though, it could be we don't have the resource. The company didn't have that culture comfort level yet, right? And
Yeah.
even like so, there are different reasons, and the fit for purpose is how the whole team, not just you, or what's the best, what's the coolest, it's for the whole team plus the customers to make that whole decision or the outcome of our process, our decisions to go in which way. And each project might be different. The reason is that you do need to hold different mindsets and different approach. However, understanding that why and the fit for purpose mindset, then you actually make your context switching much easier because we do know we often see that context switching wastes time. However,
Hmm.
it's unavoidable. By knowing that why, it helps you switch that context and navigate much easier and efficiently, actually. I'm not saying we should stop from improving ourselves, but I think the what are we trying to improve? What's the best approach to improve? What's the best DevOps approach, etc.? It really depends on the context of your project and then find that fit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that because I've found in so many instances in my life, like as a developer, sometimes you're told to do things, right?
Right.
And it's so easy to be in your little developer bubble, especially when you're a more junior person where it's like, whatever, I don't care. I just want to get my stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
And so like we can be perfectly content with just doing what we're told, but I think it does us a disservice to not ask why, because why is it that I'm doing the thing? Like I was chatting with my husband and he was talking about how he came up with like this big architecture for the stuff that he's working on, and he says it's so frustrating sometimes, dealing with some of the folks that he works with, because like they don't understand the bigger picture of what they're trying to build. They're just working on like this little piece, and so because they don't understand the full context, then it's like it's harder to like ask meaningful questions, right? and
Right.
and also, if you don't understand why you're building something, I think it's a lot harder too to like, you just sort of accept the architecture for granted, like you take it for granted, and then that ends up becoming a problem because what if like the original direction wasn't correct, right? But you don't understand it, you're not going to question it. When you understand it, you can like think about it. Oh yeah, well this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way?
Hmm. You have a good point. However, I noticed that in my journey, there are rarely, it might be like one off case, but rarely people don't care about why. It's just that they may be in their world focusing so much that they might forget. And
Mm.
I think this is the leadership um, call that I would say that as a good leader, I think they should embrace this mindset by making this opportunity more visible and approachable to the team members. Because a lot of time, I think developer doesn't even realize that. And I think usually I would um, expect that, especially leaders, definitely even the senior managers, would open that door to show, especially for developers when they're focusing, we respect their time, we respect their focus, we respect their expertise.
Yeah.
However, this is the contribution you're making. This is the impact you're making. Most of the time, when that opportunity and the vision, the values are presented to them, it's a different story.
Right. So are you saying then like it's kind of up to also like these folks in leadership positions to kind of incentivize the
Exactly.
chair director force to ask the why? And I think that's
Exactly.
such a great habit to get into, because we should always be questioning things. Like we need to be curious. Curiosity is what makes us learn.
Right, exactly. And that's how we challenge the status quo in a productive way, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also like it's so important too because like sometimes, when you work in a large organization and certain decisions are taken, right? And it's so easy to get mad, right? Like,
Hmm.
these people, like, what are they doing? I hate them. But I think if we took the time to question it, to not just wonder why, but ask why of our leadership, I think it would be I think it would be helpful as well because I think it can I think it can calm any nerves, right? And I think part of it is we
Yes.
have to get into this habit though of asking why of our leadership because I think sometimes in certain situations it can be very intimidating. Like you're in a town hall, and there are always like brazen people who will ask questions at town halls, but then there's also like the tons of people who are just sitting there in the corner, like I have questions, but I don't want
Yeah.
to ask. Um, and
Yeah.
I think like empowering folks to ask why and making it a safe place to ask why I think is really important too, right?
Yes, totally, totally. I remember that it took me quite a few years to feel comfortable asking questions in town hall, so I can totally relate to that. Um,
Yes.
but I do want to say that sometimes um, it could be an opportunity that we don't know why. Or even when it's not safe to ask why because of certain culture, it does feel a bit awkward. It's bad. But what I like to remind myself is everything's an opportunity.
Yes.
So as long as I'm here to contribute, I know this is the current climate. And okay, people don't like to be asked why, but I do want to know because I have that thirst, and that helps me to perform better. That helps my team to perform better, especially being in a management role. I think this is crucial. And sometimes you do run into a situation that's not so pretty.
Yeah.
However, I take it as an opportunity that maybe they're not comfortable yet. And then there's so many opportunities and ways that we can navigate ourselves. And at the end of the day, I find this is not only the gain for the organization, it's also gained for self in terms of your career as well, because then you grow professionally on how to solve these problems. And again, there's no right and wrong answer, just like the lightning questions you asked at the beginning. But then you get more comfortable to it, and that's your growth.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's all about being curious.
Yes, yes, yes.
Awesome. I absolutely love it. And like you've mentioned that you currently work as a manager.
Mhm.
Now, how do you find having been, an individual contributor in the past, having been like, wearing the developer
Mhm.
hat? How is it wearing the developer hat versus wearing the manager hat? Was it a big clash for you? Was it like natural progression for you? How was it?
Um, I miss being a developer. I'll be honest on that. However, I acknowledge my superpower that I mentioned is that
Yes.
um, because of my personality or the way that one thing I find is the compassion and empathy is a big thing
Yeah.
because I understand my my thought as a developer and understand my team members' thoughts. And if you truly care for them and actually enable them, um, and emphasizing why are we doing this? Why change management need to go through 20 layers of approval? Uh, by
Totally.
navigating that together as a team member makes me a better manager. And I realized that I can scale myself from a single contributor to enable more single contributors. I find that very, very satisfying. I feel good doing that. And one thing I really, really love asking my team is that sometimes as a single contributor, you really focus on, especially technology, difficult problems.
Yeah.
And it's very natural, and I did the same, to forget about the goal, like the why. What problem are we trying to solve? What, like, sometimes there's a balanced approach. Yeah, you're trying to solve this problem, and then it's way out of the budget, right? And it might take way out of the extra time, etc. So how do we find that balance point? And one approach I really find it effective, and it really makes my team member, especially developer, um, interested in thinking about this, is that I encourage them to say, when you got into this situation, don't think it like a developer. Pretend that you're Helen. Pretend that you're a manager. What would you do? And I find that approach is really helping them, and it helps me
Ooh.
too, because understanding that why, and sometimes I don't understand why, I'm looking for that why. Then I put myself in my
Yeah.
manager's shoes, even the senior leadership. What's important to them,
Yeah.
right? The code quality is important, but how do you write that if statement may be important to a tech lead, but not a CTO. And that's, it sounds as bad you saying it, but going through this process, you start to understand why the CTO doesn't focus on this. However, it's equally important to write a beautiful if statement without confusing your peers, and then later on introduce a bug, right? So
Yeah.
it's all related, and just connecting that dots, and always think yourself a level up and wear those hats, pretend yourself to be your next, like your manager or next level, and things could get a little bit clearer and easier.
I really like that so much because I think it's so easy, when it's so easy for us as developers to like complain about management. These stupid management decisions. What were they thinking? And it's funny. The first time I was in a management position, and I vowed like, oh, I'm never going to make the same, stupid mistakes that were made with me by my crappy managers. Never, never, never. And I'd like to think I was like relatively successful, but the thing you have to learn as a manager, which I'm sure you've seen yourself, is you can't please everyone. You're going
Yes.
to make some decisions that are going to be unpopular, and I mean, so be it.
Yeah,
But I think as a manager, it's your duty to explain why, but like they don't
right,
have to love it. But I
right.
also think that your team has to support it, because when your team doesn't support your decisions as a manager, then things plunge into chaos, right? Because then you find
Hmm.
yourself in a position where like people are talking behind each other's backs, and then you've got like little factions developing, and all it takes is like one bad seed to sort of like ruin the harmony of your team. So I definitely agree with you that it's so important to get people to like basically get into each other's shoes, to have that understanding and to understand the why.
Yes. And you raise a really good point because it is, I agree, almost impossible to please everyone. At the same time, though, I believe it is possible to support everyone. That's
Yes,
different.
yes. Yeah,
And
I
as a
completely agree.
yes, yes. So as the leadership, in the leadership role, I actually believe that it's our responsibility to support every team member, even though we may not able to please it because of the constraints we're in, and we can explain that background. Usually, explaining that reason, the why, the thought process helps. And even though we may not be able to achieve the goal of 100%, that's like people agreeing, we can definitely support because that's how we move forward as a team together.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When you say that, I have like a scenario that comes to mind, like in one of my more recent management roles, where basically I pivoted like the direction of my team, and on the most part, the team was super chill about it. They're like gung ho, but I had this one person who was definitely not into, the pivot. And he was extremely
Hmm.
unhappy. And, I tried my best to explain like the direction that we were going in, but it wasn't the type of work that he was doing. So the way in which I supported him wasn't, necessarily like I'm never going to be able to convince him that the work that we were doing was going to be the work that he wanted to do. So the best way
Right.
I could support him was to help him find a role internally that would better match his skill set. And I think, being able to support your team members doesn't always necessarily have to involve convincing them that you're right. It's just making sure that, you know, you're both in a good place that makes you happy.
Right, right. And that's a very interesting point because I remember going to one-on-one with my team members, and the way I navigate this kind of situation is that I am hired by the organization as a manager to achieve certain goal for the company. And in order to make that happen, to make that goal successful, there are two parts. There's company and there's you. So both need to align, right?
Yes.
And if I cannot align your career goal with the company, that won't work out.
Yep.
And it has to be both ways. And company need to align with you, you need to align with company. So both come together. If by any reason that alignment cannot be reached, and this is my thing as a manager, I say the same to all my teams no matter where I work. If you believe that alignment can be achieved by other place and that's the best for you, and I'll support that. Even
Yeah.
though that may be a loss for the company, it's a short-term loss for our company because then we don't waste time on unnecessary realignment and delaying certain things. I think we have to accept the fact that there is a middle ground, there is a balance, and technology is such a small world. I don't believe in holding the team member stuck in one team makes sense, right? Like,
Yep. Yep. Totally.
yeah, by supporting, by creating a supporting network, sometimes it could be internally within the team, sometimes it could be within the organization. Sometimes it
Yes.
could be even beyond organization. So at different levels. And that's what my firm value of belief is. Like there's no point if both sides cannot align. It's important what company wants to achieve, but it's also important the contributor, especially the bottom line contributor that who actually doing the work. Our job is to enable them, and if that have certain constraints, we try to eliminate as much as possible. And if that's not possible, then we support them at the next level. So that's what I think is important. And people often think that we want to make sure people don't quit. Um, I do not want people to quit. I would love to work with them. However, we just have to be honest to ourselves. In my in my like modest opinion, that's what's the best for the developers, the sole contributors, and what's the best for the company together.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Because if you're holding someone back like that, forcing them to be where they don't want to be, it's like you're dating somebody who doesn't want to be with you, and
Yeah.
you're just forcing them to be with you because you love them and they don't love you back. And I mean, it does no one any good at the end of the day.
Yes.
You're just
Yes.
gonna be
But doesn't
miserable.
mean you can't be friends, right? So
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think like and tech is really cool because like especially in Toronto, like, and I mean I know you're no longer in Toronto, but even like in Canada, Eastern Canada, let's say, like it's a small world, especially now that like
Yes.
we've embraced more of this remote work mentality. It's a small world, and I think like doing a solid for a coworker, like it goes a long way. People don't forget. Like I think there's like good karma in tech.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
if you help somebody out, they will help you out at some point in the future. I
Yes.
fully believe in that.
Yes. Yes. And I'm only their managers when I'm at work. Outside of work, I don't have to wear that hat. So I would rather be a good human being that I believe in myself, no matter where you are in the organization, whether you're CEO, CTO, a developer, an intern, right? So at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I'm only their manager for 8 hours.
Yep, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Switching gears a bit. Now, I know like you've gone back and forth between working both at a startup and a large
Hmm.
enterprise. Um,
Yes.
some people only work startups, some people only work large enterprises. And you've gone back and forth between the two. Can you share with folks what that has been like, and kind of what do you think were the biggest shocks in both worlds?
Hmm. I love learning. So switching gives me a total different views of things to do. The I wouldn't say like I know in advance that what I'm gonna experience and what's the shock that I may have, but actually feeling it is different. um, the risk appetite is very different depending on
Yeah.
the size of the company. And when you're in a large organization, when the process is very well developed, you take advantage of it. You basically embrace the safety, but at the same time, though, sometimes you could wonder why things move so slowly. So
Yeah,
there's a
definitely.
side effect
Definitely.
of it. Yes, and in a startup, whereas there is literally the process is no process. You embrace it, you move on, you can go production the next day whenever you're ready. You still do all your best practice automation test integration, and then you just go. It feels awesome. However, there is a catch of the risk appetite. Sometimes it could go beyond your threshold.
Yep, yep, definitely.
So that is the shocks that I would say that caught me, even though I know about this, but feeling it is
Yeah.
totally different. And you are the person in a senior leadership team being accountable.
Yep.
You have to support your team for that decision and then make that informed decision what risk to take and what risk not to take. And that is an amazing experience for me. And
Yeah.
it does push me a little bit like outside of my comfort zone. um, However, again, like I think every experience has its own learning. There's like my manager always says, don't chase for perfection, chase for progression. And I
Yep.
really take that to heart. And every situation, every mistake I make makes me a better person, make me a better, more professional, make me a better manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important to
Yeah.
recognize because, there are times in our careers where we think back to like our past mistakes and we're like, oh, this is so
Yeah.
cringy. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I did that. But like it helps shape who we are. Like we wouldn't be where we're at with our
Exactly.
careers without that. So I really love that. I think those are like really great words to live by. I definitely agree with you on the like the shock of a startup because I remember I think my second job out of school was like for a smaller organization, and I remember like we were developers touching prod. I mean, I had access to like the prod
Yep.
database, and then I I kind of decided, okay, I've had it with this sort of like, wild, wild west environment. So I wanted to go back to large enterprise because I needed more order. And of course, I went to like one of the places with the most order, which was a bank, and with all of the regulations, and so my biggest shock was going from a place where like I as a developer had access to the prod database to going to an organization where there was like a separate team for like the QA and
Yes.
UAT databases and a separate team for the prod databases, and I'm like, what? And you have to like open tickets to be able to like communicate changes, and that was so jarring. I mean, you understand why, but it's still a complete shock.
Yes. Writing a delivery letter
Oh
on
yes.
every single deployment that we have to
Oh my
make.
god, yeah, 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 the lovely document from hell. All the
Yeah. Yeah.
instructions of all the things that you have to do in order to deploy your code to prod, and pray that you didn't mess up the instructions or else.
Yes. Yes. However, this is a very interesting point because when I work on DevOps pipeline right now, that's my delivery letter.
Oh, that yeah, absolutely. But it's codified, which is beautiful. That's what I
Exactly.
love.
Exactly. And then by making that connection, I think it helps everybody on the team to be more, compassionate about what's going on. Like I remember I was cursing about delivery letter when I was the one writing it. Um, and especially when you have to redeploy, that
Yep.
minor changes and you're afraid of every single typo that will slow you down.
Oh my god,
Um,
yes.
yes, as a developer, I did curse it, so I totally understand and can relate to it. But as a manager, by supporting it, now I would say I can understand the DevOps pipeline is with that, um, is basically codified that delivery letter. However,
Yep.
you do understand that why am I want to automate this for human error for whatever reason, make that connection and help the company transition to that mindset if you can make that
Yep.
connection. Otherwise, why?
Yeah,
Why do I
yeah.
want to spend so much money doing this, right? And that's why I think, especially when I find something irritating or annoying, I try to embrace this mindset, and then it will make sense. You will find the light a bit sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a compelling argument. Like, um, whenever you've got folks who are like resisting this change to DevOps processes, right?
Mm.
All you need to do is say, "Well, do you remember the delivery letters that we had to do
Yes.
manually? This is why we have this process in place." And it's, I think it
Right.
becomes a very compelling narrative, and yet another example of why explaining why, asking why is so important.
Yeah, and we run into a situation that sometimes, again, depending on the teams and the process, we need to have a DevOps engineer to click that button.
Uh-oh.
Why? It's a continuous improvement process because even though I don't know if some of the technology team members can relate, we have a pipeline, but I need a DevOps engineer to click that button. Like, oh, why? What if my DevOps engineer is not available? Why do we need him to click that button? That button is just right there.
Yeah, totally.
Um, yeah, sometimes it's an interim product like that,
Yeah.
and it could relate it to the process,
Yeah.
approval, funding, um, infrastructure constraint, and I understand. I was the person as a developer back then when I was being blocked by
Yeah.
my DevOps engineer. But I understood because he's my great working partner. He has a life too. He needs a day off. He was busy. I totally understood. However, it's very easy to resent to the management. Like, why are you doing it
Yeah.
this way? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally.
Yes. And I like how my manager said, do things with empathy instead of a
Yeah.
sword. So, using that mindset, if you go to your manager and say that instead of blaming that button that you can't click, frame it as a way that I want to understand why did the company or management decide to design things in this way? Maybe you'll get a different answer, and maybe you'll
Yeah.
understand what challenges they are facing and put yourself in their shoes, and then your suggestion might be very valuable to push them forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the important thing. Like, understand why, but don't just take it at face value, because then
Hmm.
you can use it to further probe and say, okay, well, I get that this is the process, but can we make it better? Because
Exactly.
because we need you to understand that this is not sustainable. This is a bottleneck for my work. And I think,
Right.
and so the empathy comes into play once again, which, you
Yes.
know, we need that. We need more of that in our industry.
Yes. Yes. And I love being in the management role to put that empathy, compassion into the daily work because sometimes technology problem can really make us stay focused, but at the same time, though, you know, to put ourselves in a box and forget about that. So I like being in this role to remind my team members that everything goes a long way with your technical expertise,
Yeah.
with the empathy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we are coming up on time, but before we wrap up, I do want to touch on one thing that I think is super important that I think we need to talk about more, which is work life balance. And especially like you and I are both moms. And we are working moms in tech. So my question to you is, how do you manage as a working mom in tech? I mean, I know it's
Okay.
not like roses
Yeah.
and ponies like all the time, sunshine and rainbows. Like we know that it's hard. So, like, what are your thoughts around that?
Um, it is hard. Bottom line, it is hard. Um, but I look at it as a journey as well, and recognize that some days um, I can't do it. Some days I could, and I think it's the expectation. Like, do you put your team member as a manager those unexpected expectation writing code with no bug? Probably not. Then why do we do that to ourselves?
Yep, yep, yeah. Oh my God, that's so
Right.
true. That's
So
so true. I love that analogy
right.
so much. Yes.
So it's natural for a mom like us wanted to do it all. And I acknowledge that. At the same time though, some days I really suck that I would say that, oh, I couldn't do this. Like I can't deliver what I promised my team to. I fail my team. Sometimes I was like, oh, I have to leave my kid watching TV for an hour. I can't do this. I'm not a good mom. It's very easy to get into that situation.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, but we really have to pull ourselves out from this situation. What I try the approach I use is like, okay, if I have empathy for my team, um, do I have empathy for myself?
Yeah.
Like, do I give them unnecessary expectations, like Mission Impossible, and it's not even achievable? Then why do I do that to myself? And also knowing that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? If I don't take care of myself, how do I take care of my team? How do I take care of my family? So that's the approach I use. I wouldn't say that I mastered this, and balance. If you look at a balance being, you're always like adjusting. So I haven't
Yes.
reached that balance. I'm still adjusting, but this is the approach I use.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
true. I mean, balance isn't necessarily equilibrium. There are going to be wobbles, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, and there are going
Yeah.
to be good days and bad days. I totally agree. I mean, I feel some days that I suck. I can't do like
Yeah.
any of the things properly, like, failing my daughter sometimes, failing at life, like in general. And I totally agree with you. Like, just making sure that you take care of yourself is so important. And I'm one to admit, like, I give advice on work life balance and I am terrible at following my own advice. And I more recently, like, I have had to like take my own advice on work life balance because I found myself in a situation where I was burnt out so badly, like it was affecting my sleep. It
Hmm.
was affecting like my eating. Like I was getting like
Oh
anxiety
my,
induced
yeah.
indigestion. And so I had to like take a step back. And this was my body saying, you got to take care of yourself. So I had to like make like changes to my life to like achieve
Yes.
some balance. And we need to
Yes.
listen to our bodies.
Yes. Yes. And I know, Andrea, you actually climb
Yes.
um, with your family. I
Yes.
think that's a you don't like I personally don't climb, but I do think it's a great opportunity to give it a try, just because you'll realize that balance, like how a master elite athlete, how they climb is still like this. Why are we so hard on ourselves? I find it that even though I can climb, but when I accompany, for example, my daughter for her climbing, then I feel like there's so much to learn, and I find myself being more graceful, acknowledging that, and I think that's one activity I would definitely encouraging people to give it a try. You don't be master. I can't even climb the easiest, but because I suck at it, it helped me understand that balance, that, reaching the balance is also a progression.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And like even if it's not your jam, like you tried something that's outside of your comfort zone, and it doesn't have to be
Comfort
climbing, it can be
zone.
whatever, right? And I think
Exactly.
that's the important thing. Just try something outside your comfort zone. Your brain will thank you because it's so different from what you do day
Yes.
to day. So I think, yeah, I think
Yes.
that's amazing advice. Before we sign off, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience?
I truly believe everyone has a purpose. I think just believe in yourself, continuous questioning that why, find the purpose, and everybody will be their shining star.
Awesome. I love that so much. Well, thank you so much, Helen, for geeking out with me today. Y'all don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check out the show notes for any additional resources and to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time,
Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials. by going to bento.me/geeking out.